First argument being that feminism erodes the family, and that was its stated goal. Are you pretty familiar with early feminist writers?
A few of them, yeah. So early feminism, the first waves of them started in depending on what country you're looking at, but mainly in America in the late 1800s.
Agreed.
And then it moved into the early 1900s. And that focused around kind of economic equality, the right to own property, the right to vote, et cetera.
Yeah, well, it depends on if it was communist, but focusing on America, yes, largely. So the idea was to erode the traditional family, or the idea of a patriarchal family, where the man was at the head of the family unit, the woman operated in a support role with children, this kind of thing. Would you dispute that eroding that was a goal of feminism?
That would be an empirical claim that I might not be able to say one way or another. There might be feminist theorists who say, yes, we want to completely erode every single patriarchal family. And there are some feminist theorists who say that. A lot of those are later feminists. But some of them would go, all we want is for women to have, the right, like I said, the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to get equal access to jobs, equal access to education, things like that.
Okay. Well, then we can just jump to modern feminism then. I think
so you're fine with that? You're fine with granting that version of feminism that I just presented to you, the historic version?
It's not going to hurt my argument at all.
No, but I just want to get really clear, that feminism is good for society.
No, that's not good still not good for society.
So then why are we jumping to modern feminism?
Well, because if you're talking about feminism and modernity, so my argument's basically that feminism erodes the family, and that was its stated goal. That's my first argument. So right now, I'm giving you my argument. So in feminism, in modernity at least, we can agree, is attempting to erode at least the traditional family unit, what you would call the cross-generational or nuclear family unit.
Who's feminism, though? I mean, you can argue with hypothetical postmodern feminists, but if that's not me, then
I'll argue directly with you.
Okay, that's
Do you
fine.
promote alternative family units?
Do I promote them as a better alternative, as better than a patriarchal family?
Even equal to?
Or even equal to? Sure. I think in some cases they're equal, some cases they're better.
If you had government programs which promoted the nuclear family or the cross-generational family at a propaganda level, national level, like we would do with patriotism during a war, things like that, do you think that we would have more or less as it came to traditional family units, more or less?
More or less family units if we put out propaganda? Well, I mean, it depends on how effective the propaganda is, but sure. I mean, we probably would have more traditional family units.
Right. So then if you do a promotion for alternative family units, that would erode that, right?
For alternative, you mean?
Well, necessarily, if it's going to increase the amount of traditional family units, if there's national propaganda to move towards that.
I didn't say necessarily. I said likely, but.
Okay, but even likely, then it would be likely the other way around.
Sure, it would be likely the other way around, that if we put out propaganda for something, that people would latch onto it, as people do.
Sure. And do you agree with me that alternative family units is the propaganda which is now produced mostly out of leftist institutions, out of feminist institutions, and out of feminist propositions to government?
Well, remember, we're talking about my version of feminism, not
your version. Your version does that, right?
Have I given you much of I don't think I've told you much about my version of feminism.
Yeah, I think you have.
That's
your movement. So you just got done saying that you would propagate, or you would support the government itself pushing propaganda for alternative family units, right?
Wait, that's not. No, I didn't say that. I mean, we can watch this back, but what do you mean by that?
Like at the national level, the government doing things like putting LGBTQ flags all over the White House, maybe putting the White House in an LGBTQ flag, perhaps having NGOs, non-government organizations, which are left-wing think tanks, working hand-in-hand with government to push alternative family units, which are staunchly feminist and psychological institutions, things like that.
Okay, so, I mean, we could bring up psychology, but I'm not sure what that had to do with that. But, look, so we can say, these are fine, these things are maybe working towards normalizing those types of family units. Calling them propaganda seems like a loaded way to say that, and that's fine. If you want to use loaded terms like that, you can. That's
we can unload it. I agree with you. Propaganda has a negative connotation. I just don't know a better way to say it that people understand.
So you think that the normalization or the attempt to, normalize something is necessarily propaganda, or you think that there's a difference there?
No, I just said, I think propaganda has a negative connotation, like
Right.
definitionally a negative connotation. But when I say the word propaganda, I think most people understand what I mean by that word, meaning there's a national campaign towards X.
A national okay, I mean, if all you're saying by a national campaign towards X is that people want people to be accepted as being gay, or people want to be seen as normal for having a gay family where they have, two parents of the same sex and children that live in that household. If that's what you mean, then sure, I'm fine with the United States doing things like putting flags on their building, but not for that purpose. The reason that I'm fine with that, something like putting a pride flag up during Pride Month, is because that's a representation of civil rights. Actually, I spoke, by the way, a little plug for my YouTube channel. I spoke at the Florida Senate about a month ago about this. It's an infringement on constitutional rights to not allow government entities to do that. Historically, the Supreme Court has ruled that way, by the way. But that is a promotion of the civil rights of those people, not a promotion of their lifestyle. Now, while it might also
Wait, hang on, back up for me real quick. Did you just say that it's unconstitutional to govern for states to govern what now? Flags? Back that up. I just want to make sure I get this right.
Right. Yeah. It's so in the instances, and this is just a descriptor of historically how it's been. The Supreme Court has ruled it unconstitutional to regulate the types of speech that government entities can employ.
Government entities being...
Do you know what a government entity is?
I'm just asking you so that I understand.
I'm just curious. Like, I just didn't know if you genuinely didn't know.
You do realize that you could have proprietary definitions of things that may not.
I think it would be charitable to assume, that we're kind of using similar terms. Well, that's fine.
Well,
I
hang
think
on.
a government
Do you mean state government? Do you mean federal government? Do you mean local government?
Historically, both. The Supreme Court.
Right. So when we say government entities, I'm just trying to untangle it. That's it.
Sure. I mean, okay. Sure. Yeah. Government entities historically, both on the federal level and the state level.
Okay. So like the Confederate flag,
historically, the Supreme Court has ruled it unconstitutional for that to be infringed upon.
Okay.
Now, the issue there can be a different argument against maybe why we shouldn't allow them to do it. Maybe it's not because it's unconstitutional, but maybe there's some other reason why we should infringe on their free speech.
Do you think we should?
On
the Confederate flag?
That would be a conversation about, what's the usefulness, what kind of violence.
No, it'd be a conversation about whether or not you're consistent in your view that because states can do this, they should be able to do this, or they should do this.
Okay, that's not true. Look,
what
I was saying was that take the instance of, putting up can I say the word swastika?
I would just say Swazi.
Swazi, yeah. I put up a nice 1942 flag up, on the state building or something like that. And that causes some riot or that causes some violence or something like that. There might be an argument there to say, well, because it's had this specific negative outcome, then we should restrict them from doing that. However, that's not the case with the symbolization of, Pride Month, the gay flags that are put up on buildings. The intention there is to represent the civil rights of those people. That would be like saying you can't put up American flags.
This is a civil rights issue on either end.
Do you think that the Civil War was a civil rights issue?
No, it's a civil rights issue on either end for the flag itself. So you can't say, so if you say, well, this is negative, right, or this is positive, just because one is negative doesn't mean it's not the same civil rights issue that you're pointing at here. So if you're pointing at states historically can't say anything, or government entities can't say anything about what types of flags are put up on is it state property? Is that what you're referencing?
Right. So government buildings.
Yeah, government buildings. Then it would still be a civil rights issue if you're saying that they shouldn't put up the Confederate flag. That would still be a civil rights problem.
When I asked you, do you think that the Civil War was a civil rights issue, do you think that the Confederate flag represents the civil rights of African Americans?
No.
Okay, right. So that's the symmetry breaker here. And then there's also the
Well, what do you think a civil right is?
Do you think that
Don't ask me a question before you answer my question. What do you think a civil right is?
Look, a civil right is, something, it's actually, I think, pretty vague in our legal language. But
Yeah,
a
so
civil right is something like a human right that most people would call
so
a
like
human
you
right.
have a right to put that flag up. Okay,
No, no,
great.
no.
I have a right to put that flag up too.
Okay, see, that's where the confusion is. So I'm talking about when I say, government entities have the right to put up like pride flags. The pride flag is the symbol of the civil rights of gay people to get married, own property, not be, have their house raided while they're having sex or something like that.
Well, okay. That's an assertion. So let's start with this. So you just making the claim like it is true that this flag represents this. That's great. It represents that to this group of people. I would make the same argument with the Confederate flag. Same exact argument. That's great that it represents a negative thing towards this group of people, but it represents a positive thing towards this group of people. It would be the same thing with the LGBTQ flag. It'd be the same argument both ways.
No, look, the problem here is that the condition that I gave for, it being fine for them to use this form of free speech is the fact that it represents the civil right of that group of people. But the flag, the Confederate flag, doesn't represent the civil rights of who?
It would represent the civil rights of any people who wanted to see consistency so that they can have their flag up if they so chose. That would still be a civil right.
That isn't, maybe there's some vagueness on the civil rights thing, but I don't think that you think that, putting a flag up wherever you want on whatever property you want is a civil right. You don't believe that, right?
I think that if you were going to be consistent with your view, you would need to believe that.
That's not, okay, this isn't answering my question. You don't think that it is a civil right to display
I think it's a civil right if you put up a gay flag on government buildings. Well, I'm trying to answer the question because you said I wasn't answering it. If you put it up on a government,
re-ask it for you to
if you
answer
put
it.
it up on a government, you didn't ask me a question.
I was in the middle of asking you the question.
You said I'm not getting the answer, so I was just giving you the answer.
So look, the question was, do you think that it's a civil right to see your flag equally displayed? Because that was what you started to say.
No, I think that it would be equally consistent to say if you can have an LGBTQ flag flying on some state building and that's constitutional, then you'd have to say the same thing about a Confederate flag.
That the argument was from the fact that that flag represented the civil rights of that group.
That's nice. What I'm telling you is that that's an assertion. Demonstrate the assertion.
That's an assertion based off of the Supreme Court historically ruling it that way. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not making I can make a moral claim, and we can talk about why people shouldn't, because I think, there might be violence ensued by one versus the other, et cetera. But
okay, so why should you be able to have the gay flag up but not the Confederate flag?
Because I think that one represents the civil rights of a group, whereas the other one doesn't. One is more likely to incite violence. I don't think that the pride flag being up is more likely to incite violence.
Do you think heritage is part of civil rights?
I think that do I think heritage is part of civil rights?
Yeah. When you're talking about the historical use of the LGBTQ flag, for instance, this is going to have some type of historical meaning to the people in which that flag represents, right?
Right.
Okay. Isn't the Confederate flag going to have the exact same thing? It's going to have some kind of historical meaning when it comes to family lineage for people who live in the South, for people who they had ancestors who fought in this war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be part of their heritage and history. So don't you think that would have specific meaning to them as well?
Right, but there might, like I said, be overriding considerations. Like if hanging that flag caused violence or something like that. Obviously, you would say, okay, if we started hanging up Confederate flags and then more violence ensued against African Americans, you would say we probably shouldn't hang it, right?
So then by that metric, are you saying that if LGBTQ flags incited violence in people who were not LGBTQ, we should not hang LGBTQ flags?
Incited violence because of the flag itself? It would have to be
that would be the same thing.
It would have to be a large amount of violence.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying then, just to make sure I got your view right, what you're actually saying here is, as long as people who don't like the LGBTQ flag being up go ahead and commit a bunch of violence, they should probably take the LGBTQ flag down.
There would be multiple solutions to that, but that could be one of them. Yeah, if there was, let's say that was the only way to get people to stop being violent, that might be an alternative. Now, that's saying that that's necessary to do to stop the violence. Now, if there's other things where we can preserve, the protection of the displaying of it for civil rights purposes, for the representation of civil rights, and at the same time lower the violence in some other way, then yeah, we should do that alternative. Do you think that's controversial?
No, but now you're just switching the position, because initially what you said was, this flag if it's causing violence because it offends them so much that they can't help but become violent at the very look of it, or whatever it is, whatever it is that makes them respond negatively and commit violence because of this flag. All that would actually be doing is incentivizing people who are oppositional to the LGBTQ flag to commit violence, because then you would want to take that flag down, right?
Well, for one, I would say, listen, I would hold the same standard. Let's go back to this, because I would hold the same standard if we had a rule where we said, okay, we can display the Confederate flag and we can display the pride flags, whatever. If there started to be violence committed on one end because of the Confederate flag, I would say, like, okay, well, before we move to, taking the flag down, we should move to stopping the violence to whatever metric we can. Now, there might be other reasons why I think, like, maybe we shouldn't display a Confederate flag. I think the Confederate flag in and of itself represents the negative part of the history that shouldn't be displayed as if we're proud of it. I think it represents slavery. You don't think it does?
No, it doesn't represent slavery. It represents the heritage of people who had family members who died in the war on behalf of their beliefs.
And their beliefs were?
Well, the beliefs were to their state. It was being loyal to their state. Most Confederate soldiers didn't have any views on slavery, really, one way or the other. This was the higher-ups who had views like this. So the average soldier, in fact, there's one famous case of them saying, why is it that you're fighting in this war? You're so poor, you can't own a slave. And the response was, because y'all are here. So what that means is that as the North was invading the South, there was a lot of incentive for people to go and fight against it. They called it the War of Northern Aggression. And many of them had cause. They got their houses burned down, things like this, during northern marches to assist in combat in that war. And yeah, I'm sure that people are very proud of the heritage that they come from in the South, from people fighting for the core beliefs and on behalf of their families, even if you don't like the cause itself. The cause itself is still very much baked into the American history, just like for instance, I couldn't ban the LGBTQ flag because of HIV, right? I couldn't be like, well, that's a stain on our history, the fact that there was a bunch of gay sex parties and they were giving it to each other. I couldn't do that, right? I don't think that you can make a good, honest argument as to why it is that people couldn't be proud of the heritage of their family fighting in the Civil War.
Look, the flag is a symbol of the leaders of that war, right?
No, it's not.
The people, you just admitted this, the people who respond in that way, oh, well, we're fighting because you guys are here, they're there because they're there. They live there, they're trying to protect their homes and properties. That's perfectly fine. The problem is the people who were starting those wars were the ones who were using those flags. That's like saying, like, well, so-and-so wasn't a Nazi and, well, I don't know if I can say that word, fuck. So-and-so wasn't a, Schnazi in World War II. They just had families that were, Schnazi members. Or maybe they were just fighting because they thought it was, like, a good thing. They were fighting the other powers that invaded. You wouldn't say certainly then that, like, they should allow Schnazi flags on government buildings, right?
If the standard is that we're allowed to put up the flag of our choosing because it has some representation value that we see it as, like, let's say the people saw the Schnazi flag as being something other than I heart Hitler, I wouldn't see a problem with that. No, of course not.
Okay, so even though that it is linked to that, it is linked to support of Hitler, and the
LGBTQ flag is linked to HIV.
Okay.
That's how,
just
people see it. People see it as like, oh, wow, AIDS, right? They see the rainbow flag. I think a lot of people think AIDS.
Yeah, that's fine. But there's not like gay leaders that are out there like pushing for AIDS, right?
There's not like anybody out there pushing for the Confederacy. Who's pushing for the Confederacy?
I live in the Deep South. There's people pushing for the Confederacy.
Who? Give me a single actual institution of any kind, anywhere, or any real body of people anywhere who's pushing for the Confederacy.
What do you think there have been moves historically to cede some of the states again.
That's not the Confederacy.
Because of the... I was speaking, but there have been moves to cede states again for those particular reasons and go back to having the Confederacy again.
No, there's not.
I live in the South. I'm well, yeah.
There's not in modernity. No, there's no serious.
You could just say no, but you don't.
There's no serious movement. Demonstrate it then. Show me a serious movement in modernity.
I mean, you could take people
anywhere.
like the Proud Boys.
But the Proud Boys don't want the Confederacy. What are you talking about?
They are. Tons of them do.
No, they don't.
Tons of them
I
do.
know Gavin McInnes personally. I know for sure that he had no plans to institute the Confederate States of America with the Proud Boys.
And by Confederate States, you
Enrique, the former head, by the way, he's, I think, half black or half Hispanic himself. He has absolutely no plans to move towards the Confederate States of America. That's absurd.
They might not have practical plans to, but you couldn't ask some of these people. Like I said, I live in the South. I mean, like, we can table this here because if it's just going to be like, oh, this is an empirical claim, there's absolutely no one that's pushing for the Confederacy. I think that's absurd.
No, that's not what I said. What did I actually say? What was my actual position?
Repeat it.
My actual position was there's no serious body anywhere, not an NGO even, that I'm aware of, that is pushing for the reinstitution of the Confederate States of America. Not a single one. That the Confederate flag, the only thing you seem to be able to appeal to is, well, because in the South there was slavery, and this was a flag that the South utilized, that means, therefore, that it's a symbol of slavery. That is not only is that not logical, it doesn't follow, right? But you haven't even demonstrated that the people who want the flag there view it as a symbol of slavery. They clearly don't. Only the opposition does, right?
Are you guys okay if we move this back to feminism, though?
Yeah,
or
this
is part of the consistency of the worldview.
I just want to make it very clear that Civil War was fought over slavery.
That has nothing to do with my claim. What does that have to do with my claim?
The Confederate leaders of the Civil War were fighting
When
for
did I make the claim
slavery.
that it wasn't over slavery?
I'm just making that clear for this conversation.
Yeah,
and
but
for
when
the
did I make
audience
that
in general.
claim?
You have
So what are
made
you
the claim
arguing
that the
against?
That the people who were fighting in the war, most of them weren't just fighting for slavery.
They weren't.
But the leaders of those armies were fighting for that.
Some of them were, and some of them even were abolitionists in their own right. But I do agree with you that, generally speaking, leadership there did want to keep the institution of slavery intact. I'm not disputing that. What I am disputing is that when Southerners see the Confederate flag as a sign of their cultural heritage, which comes down to their family members defending their homes when the North came in and started burning them out, amongst other reasons, that they want it there as a symbol of slavery. And that's the argument you're actually making.
That's not true. But
then why shouldn't it be there?
I said that, well, one, there could be an argument that it incites violence, because it does. In some instances, it's used as a symbol when violence occurs, especially in the South a lot.
Great, so we have to capitulate to people who become violent because of a symbol.
Capitulate to people who become violent because of a symbol?
Mm-hmm.
They're not violent because of the symbol. They're violent because they share the values that symbol represented during that war.
So then, therefore, violent because of symbol?
No.
No.
How did you get that from that?
Well, because I don't understand. Why are they being violent because the Confederate flag is there?
They're violent because they share the same values as the people who flew that flag in that war.
No, they don't. What values are they sharing? They own slaves?
There are people in the South who want to own slaves. Yeah, I don't.
How many people in the South do you think want to own slaves?
There's groups of people. That doesn't matter.
There's no significant movement anywhere in the South to own slaves.
Even if they don't desire that particular portion of the negative ideological, set of things that people in the South believed during the Confederacy, there is lumped in with that racism because of the fact that it was a tool to push for slavery, right? So that the
North was racist.
Values. I understand.
So why
that.
do we fly the American flag? What?
It's like a joke.
No, it's not a joke. It's not like a joke. I really don't understand the position. The position of but they see it as being racist. They are linking this symbol to their feelings. We're not going to capitulate. You honestly are trying to advocate that people should capitulate to symbolism under legal expression because it makes them feel bad.
And by capitulate, you mean?
Take it down.
So you're saying that I think that we should take down Confederate flags if they cause violence, and if
they're not causing violence.
And if they are, sure. I mean, if they are linked to people who are causing violence, right? Because they share the same values of the people who initially flew those flags. Then yeah, I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah, but
I would really hope you would say the
claim.
Same thing about the Schnazi flag. I really would hope
This is a totally insane claim. So if somebody's flying the Confederate flag and it's offensive enough, you keep on acting like, well, if the flag is causing violence, the flag doesn't cause violence. The flag is nothing. It's a piece of cloth. It has no ability to cause anybody violence. People would be causing violence on behalf of, they don't like that. They don't like that flag. So all you're doing is making an argument saying we should capitulate to mobs who don't like things and are willing to cause violence by taking down the thing.
That's not it. Look, I think that's a complete straw man of the argument. The argument is multi-pronged. It's not just, if people don't like thing, take thing down. That's not the argument.
It sure sounds like that's the argument.
That is
Which part of it am I straw manning?
That is a consideration into whether or not we should allow something or not. Right?
Okay.
There can be multiple considerations. That's one of them.
Okay. Well, I guess we can move on to the second argument then, if you want to move past this one.
Sure.
So feminism has switched women from duty to materialism. Can you
explain what you mean by that first?
Yeah, I can't think of a single, when you talk about egalitarianism being, so let's start with this, I guess. Are rights real?
Real in what sense?
Do they materially exist anywhere, or are they concepts of the mind?
Yeah, rights are concepts of the mind.
Yeah, so they don't actually exist, right?
No, something that's a concept still exists.
Where?
Yeah, like feelings exist, thoughts exist.
Where?
They exist within the mind. You just said that.
Yeah, where's that?
In the mind?
Where is that, though?
In brains?
So the brain exists inside the mind?
The mind is constituted of the brain.
The brain is the mind, then?
That might be a semantic thing, but I'm fine with saying however you want to parse out those terms, that, yes, concepts come from minds. Minds either are or come from brains.
Okay, so, is the mind the brain?
Look, that's a complex question I don't have the answer to.
I don't either, so I just want to make sure that I understand where concepts exist.
I mean, look, if you just want to say the brain just for simplicity, that's fine. I'm not sure, like, are you like well versed on philosophy of mind or something? Is that like...
I'm not trying to move you into philosophy of mind. I'm just trying to ask you about rights being a concept, because when I say that they're not real, you say they are real because concepts are real. Right. But I don't understand how concepts themselves are real.
Yeah, they're real as in they're, things that are from the mind.
Okay. So
like thoughts, you wouldn't say a thought is not a real thing. A thought is a real thing.
Well, when you say objective or subjective, what do you mean by objective or subjective?
I didn't use those words, but usually in philosophy, objective means mind independent, and subjective means mind dependent.
Okay, right. So concepts, then, they're dependent on a mind?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so they don't exist absent a mind?
They don't exist absence of minds? No.
Okay, so if all human beings were gone, rights would not exist because the concepts would be gone, right?
Well, I didn't say human minds. There could be, some alien, the xenomorphs or whatever, come down and they have their own concepts of rights. Then, yeah, I mean, that's still a mind. They have rights, etc.
Yeah, no, sure. If there was aliens, they okay.
Just to clarify, it's not just human minds. It is just, minds that can conceptualize of rights.
Whatever those minds are.
Sure. Yeah,
okay, got it. So when we're talking about rights, though, they don't exist in any sort of material reality.
That question hinges upon the, is the mind the brain or not?
You can't taste them, touch them, smell them, see them, that kind of thing.
Sure. No, of course not.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So rights, for all intents and purposes, are just things that we make up.
Sure. That doesn't make them any less real.
Well, I guess we're going to have to clear this up again then. Real how? Is a unicorn real?
Well, as a fictional concept, yeah.
As a concept, it's real.
As a fiction, just to be clear. There's a way that fiction is used in a technical sense. I'm not super familiar with it, but you can point to things that are fiction and things that aren't fiction. So it would be like, well, maybe Spider-Man is real in a sense, but he's real in a fictional way. He's still real, right? There's still a book. There's still movies about him. There's still actors that play him. In a sense, there is...
Well, he's real in your mind.
Spider-Man, right? Well, there are material things tied to Spider-Man, right? But there is a real concept of Spider-Man. He's just real in a fictional sense.
Got it. So then for you, rights actually do exist as more than... They're not... When you say concept, you actually believe concepts are real in some sense.
I think they're real in a mind-dependent way.
Mind-dependent.
When you say... So I think what you're doing here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong...
I'm making sure we just don't equivocate.
But it seems like what you are doing might be a little bit of that, but it might seem like you're saying something is only real if and only if it's material. Do you believe that or no?
I don't. No.
Okay.
I'm just making sure that we get the view clear.
Sure, yeah. So there can be real things, even if we don't have a specific definition, there can be real things that aren't material.
Yeah, concepts.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, got it. So rights are a concept.
Yeah, they are a concept, but they are real. But in the sense that non-material, real
concepts,
things.
in the sense that concepts are real.
Right, just like your feelings are real, just like your thoughts, your dreams are real.
Got it. And concepts are changeable, right? Just like rights.
The concepts themselves, yeah, the way that people think of things, yeah. Those things can change, sure.
Okay. So we've established that rights are just concepts. Concepts can be real. I'll just agree in that sense because, again, it doesn't really matter, I guess, in this particular confine. So when I say duty you would have to exist, or you'd have to admit is also real then as a concept.
What do you mean by duty?
Obligations that you have absent entitlements. And I would classify rights as being entitlements you have absent obligations.
So you said a duty is an obligation absent an entitlement?
Yeah.
And then you said that, what was the second?
That for a right, it would be an entitlement absent a duty.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't actually see any duties women have in modernity. None. Like no actual duties.
Duties to what?
Anything.
You don't, like in a moral sense or?
No, in any sense. So I see a lot of entitlements, rights, entitlements absent duties. So you have the right to vote, no duty to vote, right to own a gun, no duty to own a gun, right? You have the right to incriminate or not incriminate yourself, but no duty to incriminate yourself or not to incriminate yourself, right? Every one of these rights is an entitlement. There's no duty which comes along with it. So I think that in a time before feminism, let's say, especially the 1900s, that instead of women and men in this case moving towards a materialistic outlook, they focused a lot more on duties instead of entitlements themselves. And I think that has been very bad for society, the focus on materialism from feminism.
Okay, maybe just to get more clear on that term duty, being an obligation absent entitlement. What you're saying is that, somebody should act or needs to act, right, without being given anything to act?
No, they could be given orders to act. That could be considered
that's
a duty.
not what I'm saying.
No.
Okay, maybe there was some miscommunication there, but something that, you should do whether or not you're rewarded for it or something like that. Is that something like what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So
some obligation to do, some obligation absent entitlement to perform X action.
Okay.
Now that's not a perfect definition, but I think it's a workable one for the purpose of the conversation.
Okay, so you think that, women don't have any duties, but they do have...
But I think men do. I think men have duties.
Can we get clear on if you're making a descriptive claim or if you're making some sort of prescriptive claim?
Descriptive.
Descriptive? Okay, so you think that men have duties and women don't?
Yes.
And that you think that women have rights and men don't have rights, or they do?
I think that women have more rights than men do. So this would come down to my argument for conscription. It's very simple. Men have a duty and obligation to sign up for the draft. Women have no such obligation or duty to do so, but women can still vote to send men to wars and then not fight in them because they can't be drafted. So I would consider that to be an extra right that women have that men do not have, because they are they actually have to sign up and be conscripted during wartime.
Okay, sure.
And absent wartime.
Okay, so this is argument feminism bad because men have to go to the draft and women don't, and they both get the right to vote?
No, this is an argument for materialism. I'm just expressing that when we moved away from a duty-based society for women, I can't think of any actual obligations that women have as far as duties to society, but I can think of actual obligations that men do have still as a duty to society. And so it seems that women themselves actually have more rights in modern society than men do. And also, right, that a lot of this movement towards the idea of more additional rights comes from materialism itself. Everything seems to staunchly revolve around I want, me, I want, because it feels good.
Okay. Sure. I'm not sure. Maybe we could get more clear on materialism there. I'm not for the draft. I am for people voting. I think people should vote. So if you're making descriptive claims about like, okay, well, you think that this moved towards materialism, and I'm thinking maybe you're talking about like Marxist materialism, or do you mean something totally, do you mean materialism in a totally different field?
Yeah, in this case, very simple, right? I'm just using materialism in the sense of stuff in the replacement for something that is not stuff. Like, for instance, if we're talking about concepts of God, of country, of nation, of state, things like that, which could be fulfilling, and materialism would be the idea that like stuff can be fulfilling, like actual material goods, things like this can be a form of fulfillment.
Okay, so materialism, from what you're defining, is that material goods can be fulfilling.
Yeah.
Okay, this has to do what with feminism?
That what feminism has done is move women more towards materialism than duties. Duties would be this idea of the conceptualization of I ought to do things outside of because it feels good, whereas materialism is I'm going to get this stuff because it feels good.
Right. I mean, I can think that people should do things because I think it would have good outcomes for them. Like, I think that people should vote because I think that that helps them pursue their political goals more. And I think that people enjoy freedom. I think that's good for people's well-being, is to have personal freedoms.
Doesn't seem to be.
Okay.
It seems to be that limiting people's personal freedoms is pretty good for their well-being.
Well, it seems, okay, well, in some senses you would agree with that. In some senses you wouldn't, I assume.
Yeah, in some. There you can make delineation thresholds, but everybody voting has been a disaster. It's been terrible.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that by everybody being able to collectively vote rather than people at stake in the system, what's been able to happen is that the Treasury has been able to be robbed by the collective power of the vote. So what happens is politicians end up creating voting blocks. They pit the voting blocks against each other. And all of these various blocks are trying to raid the Treasury essentially for their own personal agendas. Every single block that I can think of, in fact, is trying to raid the Treasury based on an agenda.
Right, but presumably you think some of those agendas are good, and two, you think that generally there's also good outcomes from everybody voting, right?
No, there's generally not good outcomes from everybody voting.
There's not a single good outcome, or
I didn't say there's not a single good outcome. I'd never put it in a monolith, but
that's a question.
I just answered the question. I would not say that there's never a single good outcome.
Right. So you just happen to believe that the good outcomes don't outweigh the bad outcomes.
Well, yeah, that's how I would weigh anything when it came to the political process, right?
Right. So, okay, I mean, we can just take, for example, you think that it's generally good, just prima facie good, to protect individual freedoms, right? Like
to a degree.
Well, I think I can probably give you infinitely many cases where you would say it's good to protect infinite.
I think I can give you infinitely
freedoms.
many cases in the opposition where you would think it was really good to limit them.
Probably not in the real world. Like I can take, for example, okay, you waking up and breathing this morning. Mm-hmm. That's a right that's a personal freedom that should be protected.
Me waking up and owning a machine gun, is that a personal right that should be protected?
That's going to hinge on like an that's going to be some like empirical claim that I don't.
It's not an empirical claim.
Like whether or not you.
What do you mean?
No, whether or not I think that that's a right that should be protected is going to hinge on empirical data. So whether or not that causes
How about a nuke?
More bad outcomes.
Can I own a nuke?
I think probably there would be really bad outcomes if you had a nuke.
Yeah, probably. So you'd want to limit that, right?
Right.
What about a battleship with like Uzis strapped to it that did a like 360 turnstile, just mowing everything down? I should probably not have that either, right? Or hand grenades.
Right. And those are instances that we don't currently have. I'm talking about literally from you breathing to you sitting at the table to you holding a pen to you wearing a shirt to you being in the studio to being in America. To you being able to drink water. All of those things are personal freedoms, and you believe that all of those things should be protected. And there's probably less of those like insane scenarios than...
Breathing's not a right? What do you mean? You don't have a right to breathe. It's a function of what you do.
You have
There's
a right
not
to
an empirical right to it.
Right, but you have a right to life, and stopping you from breathing.
Do you have a right to life, or do you have a concept that you have a right to life?
Yeah, the right is the concept.
The concept,
remember?
yeah. So the idea here is the concept. Yeah, I'm not sure that people have a right to life. Like if you steal my TV, I don't think you have a right to life.
Well, sure, those rights can be overridden. Those are overriding
because they don't
considerations.
exist. That's why. That
doesn't mean that
there's not really anything. So the concept here, right, it can be overridden and changed because the concept itself is flawed. The idea of rights themselves are flawed. So when you're talking about your like First Amendment right or something like this, when you talk about freedoms in general, I think that we have all sorts of duties which override those rights all the time.
Right. So, but you have to make the case that this is one of those instances where you should override somebody's rights. So when
since
you say,
women
well,
started voting,
hold on, don't interrupt me. That's
you just told me to give you the instances.
very impolite. Very impolite.
Do you think that I'm the only one cutting in?
I think I've probably cut in far less. But look, so you think that there's all of these instances where like you shouldn't have your right to breathe infringed upon. You shouldn't have your right to XYZ. That doesn't mean that those things aren't real just because they can be overridden. I don't know what the argument for that would be.
So the concepts themselves, right? These things are changeable concepts, right?
Yeah,
all of them are changeable.
The concept itself is.
And where does the concept exist? Does it exist in all brains, or does it exist in one brain?
Well, I think that people have different concepts of rights.
Right.
But what I am saying though is when people say I have a right to life, they're not saying I have a right to life in every single imaginable possible scenario. Do you know that?
Do you know that when you express things that you should express them precisely so that I know exactly what it is that you do mean? So when you say,
sure.
When you say do you know when people say X, what they actually mean is Y? It's like, no, I don't actually know that, because from what you're saying is when people say X, this is it. You just leave it on rights. That's what people say. And it's like, now you clarify and say, well, when people say X, they really don't always mean X. Fair enough. I can grant that is true, but you didn't really make that case before.
You're not just granting that it's true, though. Here's what happened, though, is that you said that, there's instances where these rights can be overridden, right? So you do recognize that people, when they say you have the right to life, they aren't talking about the right to life in an absolute sense.
No. That's a pedantic way to look at my words. Maybe my words were sloppy there, right? It's just a way for me to categorize the words that you understand what I'm saying. So I could say override or something like this. If you want to pin me on it, I can use a different word. But the entire idea here, though, is that these are just concepts. Because they're just concepts, they're very changeable in the human experience as concepts. And they only exist in single brains. They don't exist in collective brains, right? They can't. Every single brain has to have some variation of this concept, right?
Sure, but people have general, agreements on what a concept means.
Sure.
So they can approximate as close as they can. But when somebody says, like I said, they have the right to life or they have the right to breathe, I would think that that they're not saying, and also just to reframe this, because you said it's like, oh, well, when people are saying they're X, you're saying they actually mean Y. No, I'm saying they mean something like X asterisk, to the right-hand corner.
So
or
actually
something
Y.
like that. That's not what I said. I think that's kind of
it can't be X and not X. So it has to be X actually means not X.
Right, but it could be X with an additional clause that's understood to be true. Like when you have conversations, there are things that you understand with people. Like there's social cues. I think people typically understand.
I agree.
Rights aren't absolute.
I'm just making sure that if there's a meaningful distinction, we untangle the meaningful distinction. If there's not, we don't.
Sure. Okay. So when people talk about rights, because I guess we'll just get 100% clear on this now. When people talk about rights, they're typically not talking about some absolute, ability to do anything, some entitlement to do anything no matter what.
Okay. I agree.
Sure.
But I never thought that was in dispute. What was in dispute is the concepts themselves, right? So the idea is, well, I have a right to do X, and then somebody comes along and says, no, you don't, and puts a bullet in your head, right? Did he have the right, or did you have the right?
Did the person who put the bullet into somebody's head have a right to do that?
Yeah.
Not per the person who they did it to.
Right, exactly. So then these are just concepts. They're individual. They're mind-dependent concepts for individual minds themselves. They're not even collectivized.
Well, there can be rights that we agree upon.
Sure, you can agree. You can agree to them, right? But you can't really say that when somebody else comes along and says, "But I have a right to violate your rights," that they don't have a right to do that. That's the problem with them, right?
Under your frame of rights, they don't have that. per your standard, they don't have that right.
Yeah, but per their standard, they do.
Yeah, that's just trivially true. If you're just saying like
trivial, and trivial truths are true because they're true. So the thing is like, yes, it's trivially true, just meaning it's true, that if a person says, well, I have the right to kill you, and you say you don't have the right to kill me, right? Mm-hmm. I just want to know who actually here has the right to do what?
Actually has the right?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Who here actually has the right to do something? Who here actually can actualize this right?
Okay, the question is, who has the ability to do what they want to do? Mm-hmm. Well, obviously the person with the gun. Do you think
so
that's in dispute?
What right did that other person actually have?
Well, the person, okay, maybe we should get clear on what you mean by a right. What do you mean by right? I've
already told you like 50 times. It's entitlement absent of duty.
Yeah, so, okay, they have the right, and these rights are, like I believe that I have an entitlement, mm-hmm. To my life.
Believe.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they believe that, to them, they had the right. To the other person, they did not have the right.
Right. So in this case, really what it boils down to is your rights are just force, right? Rights just come down.
Force is the way that the rights are protected.
Well, it's the only way they can really exist.
No, they do exist. You admitted that concepts exist, right? So like somebody can...
I can grant that they exist, sure.
Right. So they do exist without force, quote unquote.
Well, no, not actualizing them though.
So you didn't get clear what you mean by actualizing.
Yeah, so if you want to have the right to freedom of speech and there's nobody around, I suppose you would have the right to freedom of speech because you're the only mind which has this concept in it. But mm-hmm. if you come into contact with another mind who says you don't have the right to freedom of speech, right? How do we determine which mind actually has a right here and which one doesn't? We can't, right? We just say you have a concept in your mind and you have a concept in your mind. But this rights thing, right? Mm-hmm. This thing doesn't really exist. Just this concept is what exists.
See, you keep saying it doesn't really exist. Of course it exists. Like you said, if you're on the island and nobody's there to infringe upon that right, even if somebody does infringe upon that right, you could still say, well, that person has the right to life. They have the right to speech.
Then people have the right to kill other people if they want to.
Well, that's not what I said. Per that person, they...
No, it is what you're saying.
They would...
It's an extension of what you're saying.
That statement would be true.
Okay.
To them.
If it is the case that collectively society decides that they have a right to enslave women, they do in fact have that right in reality to do that, don't they?
If you're saying that they're acting on what they believe is to be a right, then yeah. That's what they're doing. That's trivially true.
So then what is...
That doesn't... So these are descriptive claims, though.
Yeah.
I'm not interested
in
right
now, we're
claims.
just making sure that we have this... So I just want to make sure I got this right and that we're not speaking past each other. Rights are real as concepts. Concepts are real. Yes? So therefore, if it is the case that conceptually people want to enslave all women... and they call that concept a right, then they would have the right to enslave women, and that would be a real right that they would have, right?
To them?
Yes.
What you're missing is the index. So, like, when I say I have a right, I am talking, like I said, about more so a belief or a value, sometimes is what I'm referencing. So when somebody says, like, even if someone was in prison wrongfully, maybe, like they didn't actually commit a crime, but it was believed that they committed a crime. And that person said, I have the right to be free. Now, they're not saying something nonsensical. You understand like what that person is saying. They're saying, I desire to be free. It's wrong. And what they mean by, it's wrong is it goes against their values for them to be imprisoned.
It goes against their preferences, right?
Yeah, in that case, so that statement is true.
Yeah, sure, but it's equally true to say, no, we're going to keep you a slave.
Not to that person.
Yeah, not to that person, but just to the other people.
But once again, not to that person, and not to me, certainly.
But if it is the case that rights themselves, being a value of the concept of the mind, these concepts are real, then that would mean that all people who were slaves had the right to be free. That's true. But also that all people who enslave people had the right to enslave them, and that's also equally true, correct?
If what you mean, like we can substitute...
No, this is what you mean.
If you let me finish sentences, I can do that.
Okay.
So when you have the people who are enslaving other people, if what you mean by those people saying, I have the right to enslave these people, is that those people are, substituting out their words for like, I have the value that these people are enslaved, then to them that is true. They do in fact have that value.
So for you, a right is simply, wait, I'm confused now. Now I'm actually confused on your view. You said a right is just a belief?
Yeah, I think, well, when we're talking about like concepts, yeah.
Okay, if it's just a belief, then it's an equally true belief that these people over here, their right to enslave you exists.
It's equally true, and because the wording, I think people use this wording in a weird way sometimes. What would be more accurate to say is that that person desires this, they value this, or they prefer this.
Okay, so what gives them the right to something?
That's what I'm saying that the right is. So like
So
usually
it's just
when
a
you
belief.
talk about, well,
Yeah.
you can talk about rights as social contracts, and maybe they're violating a social contract in that way. But when I say like I have a right to be free, a lot of the times what I'm expressing is like, a very strong desire or something like
Yeah,
that.
just a belief that you have.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what those people are saying. So if you're just saying it is true that those people, to them, it is true, I have the right to enslave this person. And if you substitute what they mean by that by I desire to enslave these people or I have a strong will to do so, then that's trivially true. You don't disagree with that, certainly.
Well, with your view, no. This is great. You have to concede that the right is real, that people collectively have the right to enslave people, and that is real. Concepts are real.
And what you
this
mean
belief is real.
by right is it's real in the sense that they do in fact believe or value that thing. Yeah, that is
Now,
true
is
that
that
they in fact believe and value
is
those
that
things.
belief that you can hold people in slavery? Is that a belief which I mean, obviously you're against it, right? I'm
Right.
not saying you're not.
Of course.
But that belief, this value which is real, this concept which is true, they actually do have the right to do this. Is that morally worse than your view that they shouldn't?
To me, yeah.
To you. And that's it, only to you, right? Because it doesn't
Yeah, of
make you feel
course.
good, right?
You can say words like that, like you can say, doesn't make me feel good. That would be more in line with somebody who takes some like a motivist view on that type of thing. But I'm fine with saying that, there's a proposition that, that is wrong. And by that, I mean that, that's something that goes against my values.
Got
or
it.
my desires or preferences
So
in a very strong way.
now we've untangled all of that. This argument actually becomes much easier. So the goal of feminism is to push people or push women specifically towards materialism and not duty. And I think that the belief of people in duty is much more important than the belief of people in materialism. So I think that the idea of having duties to nation, the idea that having duties to family, the idea that having duties to community far outweigh the idea of the right to pursue whatever trivial, meaningless material pursuit that you have. That duty should come first, and that society would look better if they did.